Welcome to this explainer. Okay, be honest. Have you ever read the financial news and just felt like you were trying to decode a completely foreign language? Well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're going to demystify all of that. We'll dive into the actual mechanics of the economy to make complex jargon easy to grasp and, most importantly, highly applicable to your everyday life. We're breaking down the massive forces that move global markets and connecting them right back to what matters most, your wallet.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover economics fundamentals, understanding inflation, the role of interest rates, causes of a recession, and finally, protecting your finances.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Economics Fundamentals, looking at the macro picture.
We have to start right at the foundation, looking at the broad, sweeping forces that actually dictate our financial world. When we talk about macroeconomics, we aren't looking at a single business or one specific household. We're looking at the aggregate, the total sum of changes in a country, like the overall growth rate, or the percentage of the population that's unemployed. It's essentially the ultimate bird's-eye view of how well an entire society is producing and consuming.
Think of it as the contrast between the overarching national economy and the everyday decisions you and I make. While macroeconomics is looking at the entire forest, tracking things like overall inflation, microeconomics is focused on the trees. It examines the financial decision-making of individuals and businesses. It looks at your buying habits, why you value one product over another, and exactly how your specific household responds when prices change.
So how do experts actually measure if this giant macro machine is working? Well, they look at GDP. Think of this as the ultimate scorecard for a country's economy. It literally adds up the monetary value of every single completed good and service produced within a nation's borders over a specific time, usually a year or a quarter. It's a quick but super effective indicator of whether the economic engine is thriving and growing or if it's shrinking and sputtering.
But here's the absolute kicker. This fundamental balancing act drives literally everything. The law of supply and demand dictates actual market prices and the volume of goods available. It is a constant push and pull. When prices are high, buyers naturally demand less, but suppliers are absolutely thrilled and want to provide more. When prices fall, buyers rush in, but suppliers might pull back. This interaction is the beating heart of a free market economy.
But, what happens when that perfect scale tips? What happens when demand wildly outpaces supply, or supply suddenly drops, and the economic engine starts running a little too hot?
Which brings us to Section 2, Understanding Inflation and Rising Prices. We all feel this one right. Every time you hit the grocery store or the gas pump. Inflation simply means your money buys less today than it did yesterday. A great way to visualize this is to imagine a basket of goods, say milk, bread, maybe some chocolate. If you dig up a receipt from a few years ago, that exact same basket of goods cost you less than it does today. It's not just one single item getting pricier. It's an overall decline in the purchasing power of your currency. Now, inflation generally stems from two main culprits. First, you've got demand pull inflation. This happens when consumer confidence is booming, unemployment is low, and literally everyone is rushing to buy things all at once. Businesses just can't keep up, so prices skyrocket. On the flip side is cost push inflation, which has nothing to do with consumer demand. This happens when creating a product suddenly gets way more expensive. Think about the 1970s energy crisis. Oil prices spiked, which made manufacturing and transportation cost more, and those costs were pushed right onto you, the consumer.
So when things get totally out of hand and that basket of groceries becomes painfully expensive, how do policymakers actually step in and pump the brakes on the economy?
Let's get into Section 3, the role of interest rates and the cost of borrowing.
This is the primary tool that central banks, like the Federal Reserve here in the US, use to stabilize the whole shebang. An interest rate is essentially the cost of borrowing money, whether it's you taking out a mortgage for a house or a massive corporation taking out a loan to build a factory. The interest rate determines the actual financial burden of that debt. Low interest rates mean cheap money, encouraging spending. High rates? That means expensive money.
Let's follow the actual mechanics of how this plays out. Say inflation is running really high. The Fed steps in and raises the federal funds rate. Immediately, borrowing costs go up across the board. Auto loans, mortgages, credit cards, you name it. Because taking on debt is suddenly so much more expensive, consumer and business spending naturally cools off. With fewer people rushing to buy, supply chains finally get a breather to catch up to the demand, and ideally, prices stabilize without crashing the economy.
But as you can imagine, this is a super delicate balancing act. What happens if demand plummets too fast? Or what if a sudden shock causes the economic engine to stall out completely?
That takes us to Section 4, the causes of a recession and economic downturns. A recession happens when there is a severe, negative disruption to that balance between supply and demand we talked about earlier. And this is wild, but humanity has been dealing with this for thousands of years. According to Ted Ed, way before modern stock markets, people in ancient Britain actually used bronze as currency. But around 800 BCE, the value of bronze suddenly and sharply dropped. This massive shock to their money caused deep social upheaval and a profound economic crisis. It was literally a massive recession, and it only ended when they started using iron for farming, which eventually pulled them out of the slump.
Fast forward to today, and we know that capitalistic economies don't just go up in a straight line forever. They face natural, repeating periods of growth and decline. We call this constant loop the business cycle. Understanding that economies will always expand and contract helps governments and investors make smarter decisions, because they know that a boom will eventually cool off and a bust will eventually recover.
Now, when that business cycle hits a severe contraction, it often triggers what's called a bear market. A bull market is full of optimism and rising stock prices, but in a bear market, deep pessimism takes over. Expectations tank, and individual securities or overall indexes drop by at least 20% for a sustained period. Investors get spooked and rush to sell off their assets to avoid losing money, which, of course, just drives prices down even further.
And psychology plays a massive role in our economy. Think about it. If people are simply afraid a recession is coming, they pull back on spending and investing to hoard cash. Because of that, businesses see a drop in sales, so they cut operating costs, maybe even lower wages or lay people off. Those lower wages mean consumers have even less money to spend, creating a vicious cycle of even lower demand. Literally, the sheer fear of a recession can actually cause one.
So, with all these massive macroeconomic forces, shifting interest rates, and inevitable business cycles constantly swirling around, what can you, the individual passenger on this economic ride, proactively do?
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, protecting your finances and preparing for inflation.
Let's pivot away from the high-level macro stuff and bring this right down to your wallet so you can build some true financial resilience. Equifax has some great actionable tips for this. First up, when inflation hits, do a really detailed review of your budget to find some wiggle room for those higher utility and grocery bills. Next, build up that emergency fund. You really want to aim for 3 to 6 months of living expenses, ideally stashed in a high-yield savings account. Third, when the Fed hikes up interest rates, try to delay taking on massive new debt. Hold off on buying that new car or house until rates come back down. And finally, and this is absolutely crucial, don't let a bear market scare you off. Keep funding your long-term investments in your retirement accounts.
The economy is always going to have its peaks and valleys. The business cycle pretty much guarantees it. We really hope this explainer helps you decode the financial news with a lot more confidence. The only question left is, since the economic